We are witnessing a moment where traditional military might is being neutralized by a far more patient, strategic, and invisible form of warfare. This isn't just about missiles and borders anymore. It's about the total collapse of the Western diplomatic and economic order. The recent communication between the United States and Russia regarding the conflicts in Iran and Ukraine has been described as frank, but notably not friendly. While some see this as a sign of tension, the reality is far more calculated. Russia is playing a masterstroke of diplomatic patience. They aren't closing the door to dialogue, even when provoked by assassination attempts or long-range missile strikes on their soil. Why? Because they understand the art of the long game. War is an extension of politics, and right now the politics of the West are in a state of absolute freefall. Take the United Kingdom, for example. We've seen British-made missiles striking deep into Russian territory. Conventionally, this would be a red line that triggers an immediate retaliatory strike. Russia has every legal right under international law to vaporize the facilities producing those weapons, but they haven't. If Russia strikes back now, they turn a failing political leader like Keir Starmer into a wartime hero, potentially saving his collapsing administration. Instead, Russia chooses to wait. They are watching the British government devolve on its own volition. Sometimes doing nothing is the most lethal move you can make. This same logic applies to the energy markets. By keeping the door to diplomacy just slightly ajar, Russia has managed to see the lifting of major oil sanctions. Think about the math here. Moving from selling discounted crude at $23 a barrel to $80 on the open market is a massive strategic windfall. That $57 per barrel profit margin isn't just balancing budgets, it's funding a long-term geopolitical shift. The U.S. Leadership is suddenly becoming very educated about the reality of global energy supplies, especially with the Strait of Hormuz hanging in the balance. The West is desperate for a solution, and they are coming to Russia to find it. The leverage has shifted entirely. Russia is no longer the one seeking an exit. It is the United States that needs assistance to achieve any outcome that is politically useful at home. We are looking at a situation where the U.S. is essentially running away from its commitments in Ukraine as fast as possible, seeking any peace deal that can be sold to a frustrated public. Russia knows this. They are waiting for the U.S. to accept terms that reflect the new reality on the ground, an Alaska Plus scenario where the strings are now held by Moscow. Meanwhile, the situation in Iran is exposing the ultimate limits of Western power. The idea that the U.S. or Israel can dictate an off-ramp for the Iranian conflict is a fantasy. Iran is in the driver's seat. They are sticking to a pre-planned war manual, while the West reacts with confusion, changing its strategy every few days. We hear talk of opening the Strait of Hormuz by force, but that would require a massive amphibious operation that the U.S. simply does not have the resources or the manpower to sustain right now. The international economy would collapse long before those ships even reached the shore. We are seeing a total mismatch between rhetoric and reality. While leaders brag about imposing casualties, their own domestic economies are being trashed by energy shortages and mounting debt. The global perception of the U.S. as an untouchable military titan is evaporating. From the air defense gaps in South Korea to the failure of missile shields in the Middle East, the world is watching. This isn't just a regional conflict, it's the unveiling of a toothless tiger. The strategic landscape in the Middle East has shifted from a series of tactical skirmishes into a full-scale demonstration of Western overreach. For years, the narrative was that a regime change in Iran was just one well-placed strike away. But as the smoke clears over 12 days of intense conflict, that illusion has shattered. The West is no longer in control of the timeline. This is going to go exactly as long as Iran wants it to go. We are witnessing the failure of the OODA loop in real-time: observe, orient, decide, and act. While the Iranians have remained disciplined and stuck to their long-term war plan, the United States has changed its strategy 5 or 6 times in less than a fortnight. When you are reacting to your enemy, you are losing. The military options being floated in Washington and Paris are bordering on the delusional. We hear grand pronouncements from leaders like Macron about a defensive mission to open the Strait of Hormuz. But how? Brute force would require seizing Car Island, Keshem Island, and projecting power deep into Iranian territory. You would need 80,000 Marines just to hold the shoreline, backed by an air bridge that would be under constant threat from ballistic missiles and swarms of drones. The reality is that the U.S. doesn't have the amphibious shipping or the logistical depth to pull this off. Even if they tried, the global economy would draw its last breath long before the first ship cleared the strait. What makes this situation even more critical is the depletion of the Western arsenal. We have spent months, even years, supplying high-end precision munitions to various fronts, and the cupboard is starting to look bare. While there are plenty of dumb bombs in storage, the standoff precision missiles, the ones that allow a military to strike without putting pilots in harm's way, are a finite resource. If the U.S. is forced to penetrate Iranian airspace to deliver gravity bombs, we will see air defense ambushes that could result in a Black Hawk Down scenario on a Persian scale. Losing sophisticated aircraft and pilots in a rescue mission is a nightmare the administration is not prepared to handle. Instead of a coherent strategy, we are seeing a desperate expansion of the target list. When you hear that thousands of targets have been hit, you have to ask, what exactly is being destroyed? Reports indicate that in the initial waves, a significant portion of the targets were empty warehouses, schools, and hospitals. This isn't a surgical strike. It's beginning to look like a campaign of cultural and industrial demolition that lacks a clear political objective. History teaches us that strategic air campaigns rarely break the will of a unified population. In fact, it often does the opposite. Just look at the air campaigns of World War II German production actually increased under the pressure of Allied bombing. Iran is no different. Every empty building hit only serves to unify the Iranian people in a scream for revenge. This failure of intelligence and strategy has ripple effects across the entire region. The allies the U.S. counted on are starting to back away. The Kurds, once seen as a proxy force for a ground invasion, have realized the winds have shifted and are refusing to play their part. Azerbaijan, instead of acting as a staging ground for retaliation, is sending humanitarian aid to Tehran. Even the threats from senators like Lindsey Graham towards Saudi Arabia are falling on deaf ears. The Saudis know that if they join this fight, their own energy infrastructure will be the first thing to go up in flames. They've seen that the U.S. cannot protect itself from a determined missile barrage. So why would they risk their entire national wealth on a failing American promise? In this vacuum of leadership, Russia has emerged as the ultimate mediator. Because the U.S. has no connectivity with Tehran or Baghdad, they are forced to rely on Moscow to act as the interlocutor. Russia is now in the driver's seat of the diplomatic process, and they are using that position to advance their own goals in Ukraine and beyond. They aren't helping for free. Every piece of advice or mediation Russia provides comes with a price tag that the West will be paying for decades. The world is being reordered, not by the loudest voices in Washington, but by the quietest players on the sidelines who knew how to wait. What we are seeing now, on day 13 of this conflict, is the absolute collapse of the regime change fantasy. The initial strikes on February 28th were designed to be a decapitation blow, taking out the heart of the Iranian leadership, including the supreme leader. But look at the result. Instead of a country in chaos, we see a unified nation. The ruling triumvirate has stabilized, and Mojtaba Khamenei has stepped into the breach. The West bet on a house of cards that would fold under pressure, but they accidentally built a fortress of nationalistic fervor instead. The cost of this miscalculation is being measured in billions of dollars every single day. The Pentagon is burning through nearly $1 billion every 24 hours, while global oil prices have smashed past the $100 mark. This is the oil trap Russia warned about. While the U.S. and Israel pound empty buildings and civilian infrastructure, Iran has effectively strangled the global economy by closing the Strait of Hormuz. 1/5 of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas is now trapped behind a wall of Iranian drones and naval mines. The sheer desperation of the Trump administration is becoming visible. To prevent a total global energy meltdown, they've had to pull a complete 180-degree turn, loosening sanctions on Russian oil just to keep India and other major economies from collapsing. Think about the irony. To fund a war against one adversary, the U.S. is forced to enrich another. This isn't strategy, it's a frantic attempt to plug holes in a sinking ship. Russia isn't just watching from the sidelines, they are actively profiting from every mistake made in Washington. And while the world's attention is fixed on the fire in the Middle East, the authoritarian axis, as it's being called in D.C., is cementing its bond. The comprehensive strategic treaty between Russia and Iran is no longer just paper. It is now the blueprint for a new world order that operates entirely outside the Western financial system. They are integrating their payment systems and cutting out the dollar, creating a shadow economy that sanctions cannot touch. The U.S. military buildup in the region is the largest we've seen since 2003, but the results are a shadow of the past. The overmatch that was promised has turned into a stalemate of attrition. We are seeing high-value targets like girls' schools and hospitals being hit, which only fuels the international condemnation and erodes what little diplomatic capital the U.S. had left. The peace president narrative is being shredded as the body counts rise and the humanitarian toll becomes catastrophic. This isn't just a war on Iran anymore. It is a stress test for the entire Western alliance, and the cracks are starting to show. From the displacement of 700,000 people in Lebanon to the targeting of British bases in Cyprus, the conflict is metastasizing. The world is beginning to realize that the U.S. cannot protect its allies, cannot secure the energy markets, and cannot dictate terms to a resilient adversary. The chessboard has been flipped. The ammunition crisis is no longer a theoretical risk. It is a strategic emergency. While President Trump has publicly claimed that U.S. stockpiles are virtually unlimited, the internal reality at the Pentagon is far more precarious. In just the first 10 days of Operation Epic Fury, the consumption rate of high-end interceptors like the Patriot PAC-3 and the SM-3 has been staggering. We are seeing a burn rate that could exhaust key precision-guided munitions in as little as 25 days of high-intensity conflict. This is the ammunition wall. If the U.S. continues at this pace, it risks stripping its defenses bare, not just in the Middle East, but in the Indo-Pacific, leaving a wide-open door for other global rivals to step through. The administration's maximum pressure campaign has effectively cornered itself. By seeking to re-dollarize Iran and bring its massive oil reserves back into the Western-led system, the U.S. has instead forced Tehran into a survivalist crouch. The strikes on February 28th, which targeted everything from nuclear sites to cultural landmarks like the Golestan Palace, were intended to spark a popular uprising. But the intelligence was flawed. Instead of a collapse, we see a hardening. The appointment of Mujtaba Khamenei as the new supreme leader signals that the regime is not preparing to negotiate. It is preparing for a multi-generational war of attrition. This miscalculation has profound implications for the U.S. dollar and the future of global trade. Iran has begun targeting U.S.-linked banks across the region and using swarm drone tactics to paralyze Dubai's airport and naval traffic. The Strait of Hormuz is becoming a graveyard for the market-based development the White House hoped to impose. Every drone that slips through the billion-dollar defense shield is a message to the world. The American security umbrella is leaking. While Washington burns through a $1 trillion defense budget to replenish these stocks, the BRICS nations are moving in the opposite direction. India, as the 2026 BRICS chair, is positioning itself as the stabilizing force in a polarized world. While the U.S. is withdrawing from international norms and focusing on raw kinetic power, India and China are discussing a humanity-first approach to digital infrastructure and energy security. They are building a parallel world, a resilience framework that doesn't rely on the U.S. Treasury or the Pentagon's protection. The leverage has shifted so dramatically that Russia is now reportedly sharing advanced drone tactics and the real-time locations of U.S. warships with Iranian forces. This is a level of high-stakes intelligence sharing we haven't seen in decades. It means the U.S. is no longer fighting a regional power. It is fighting a global network that is successfully out-positioning the West at every turn. The U.S. is playing a game of checkers in a room where the lights are being turned off, one by one. The strategic shockwaves of Operation Epic Fury are now reaching the shores of every major continent. As of the 12th of March, 2026, we are witnessing a global energy crisis that is no longer a warning, it is a brutal reality. Brent crude has officially smashed past the $100 per barrel mark. In Southeast Asia, government offices are shutting down and travel is being restricted as nations scramble to secure what little oil is left on the open market. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has turned the Persian Gulf into a bottleneck that is suffocating the global supply chain, leaving millions in the dark and cold. This is the chaotic backdrop against which Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump held their most recent high-stakes conversation. While the official reports call it frank, the subtext is clear. The leverage has shifted to Moscow. Putin is playing the role of the global indispensable man. He is positioning himself as the only mediator who can bridge the gap between a desperate Washington and a defiant Tehran. By holding the keys to both the energy markets and the diplomatic back channels, Russia is leveraging the Middle East crisis to force a resolution in Ukraine on its own terms. The battlefield in Ukraine is reflecting this shift in real time. For the first time in nearly 3 years, we are seeing significant movements as the Russian military pushes toward the southeastern strongholds of Donetsk. While Kyiv claims to be reclaiming small pockets of territory, the strategic momentum is being drained away by the sheer scale of the conflict in the Middle East. The U.S. can no longer provide the blank check of military aid to Ukraine when its own precision-guided munitions are being exhausted in the skies over Iran. Russia understands that the West's attention is a zero-sum game, and right now the Middle East is winning. But the most chilling development is the technological anchor being provided by Russia and China to Tehran. We are seeing reports that Iran is now utilizing China's highly accurate Beidou navigation system and advanced Russian S-400 air defense tech to negate Western stealth capabilities. This isn't just a regional partnership, it's a shadow alliance designed to prove that the American military umbrella is obsolete. When a girls' school is hit or a medical facility is destroyed, as we saw in the tragic strikes near Bandar Abbas, it's not just a tactical failure. It's a signal to the global South that the Western rules-based order has collapsed into raw, indiscriminate violence. The U.S. administration is caught in a vice. On one side, they face the military reality that they cannot bomb Iran into submission. On the other, they face an economic collapse that could trigger a domestic political disaster. The maximum pressure campaign has hit its limit, and the only path forward involves talking to the very man they spent years trying to isolate. Russia isn't just watching the fire. They are the ones holding the extinguisher, and they intend to make the West pay a heavy price to put it out. As we enter day 13 of this relentless conflict, we have reached a pivotal crossroads. The United States and Israel have pounded more than 5,500 targets across Iran, claiming to have neutralized the Iranian Navy and crippled their missile infrastructure. But the reality on the ground tells a very different story. Despite the intense strike waves being coordinated by AI-driven systems at Central Command, the Iranian regime has not buckled. Instead, they have initiated a long-term war of attrition designed to bleed the American economy dry. The global fallout is no longer a prediction, it is here. Brent crude has officially surged past $100 a barrel today, the 12th of March, 2026. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively a dead zone for commercial shipping, paralyzed by Iranian drone swarms and naval mines. While President Trump promises the war will end soon, the markets aren't buying it. Across Asia, from South Korea to Pakistan, nations are facing a desperate energy scramble. We are seeing fuel caps, 4-day work weeks, and a total disruption of the lifeblood that keeps the modern world running. The most dangerous development, however, is the shift in the target deck. Iranian President Pezeshkian has made it clear. If the strikes continue, they will begin targeting U.S.-linked banks across the Middle East. We've already seen drones hitting Dubai's airport and power lines being taken out in Kuwait. The haven of stability that the Gulf states spent decades building is evaporating. Investors are fleeing, and the very military bases meant to protect these allies are now being seen as magnets for Iranian retaliation. In the middle of this chaos, Vladimir Putin has emerged as the global power broker. Following a frank hour-long phone call with Trump, it has become evident that the path to peace in the Middle East now runs through Moscow. Russia is leveraging its comprehensive strategic partnership with Tehran to act as the ultimate intermediary. But there are conditions. Iran is demanding the recognition of its legitimate rights, reparations for the damage caused, and firm international guarantees against future aggression. For the United States, the military victory they sought is being overshadowed by a strategic defeat. While they destroy buildings in Iran, they are losing the global economic war and depleting their high-end munitions at a rate that is simply unsustainable. The world is watching as the peace president is drawn into a quagmire that could redefine the global balance of power for a generation. What do you think? Is the West walking into a trap, or can they find an off-ramp before the global economy collapses? Drop your take in the comments right now. Smash that like button if this deep dive woke you up, and subscribe with notifications on so you stay ahead of the curve as this crisis unfolds.